Emma Carter pushed open the sleek glass doors of Regency Auto Gallery, the kind of place where the lighting shimmered off polished chrome and the sales team dressed like they were closing deals with royalty. Emma, however, wore none of that polish. Her jeans were well worn, her white t-shirt plain, and her ponytail unstyled. But she walked with quiet purpose. Her eyes scanned the room until they landed on a beautiful midnight blue coupe near the center of the showroom. That car she thought would be perfect for her sister's birthday. After everything her sister had been through, surviving breast cancer, rebuilding her life, this gift would mean something more than just luxury. It would symbolize survival, resilience, and love. Before she could get a closer look, a sharply dressed man approached. His name tag read, Chad Reynolds, sales manager. His smile was practiced, but didn't quite reach his eyes. He glanced at her shoes, first, then her shirt, then gave a small, almost imperceptible smirk. "Can I help you find the used lot?" he asked, as if it were obvious that she was in the wrong place. Emma blinked, confused. "Actually, I'm interested in the blue coupe right there," she said, pointing. Chad chuckled lightly and shook his head. "That model starts at nearly $300,000. We usually show it by appointment, only. For serious buyers." He gestured toward the exit. "Used cars are in the East Building, 3 blocks down." Emma didn't flinch. She simply nodded, still calm, still composed. "I'd like to learn more about this model if that's all right," she said politely. Chad sighed audibly. Around them, a few other staff members were watching. One whispered something to another and snickered. A couple nearby customers turned their heads. Emma felt a flush rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a familiar ache. This wasn't the first time she had been judged by her appearance. She smiled through it. "Is there someone else I could speak to?" she asked. A younger salesman, clearly uncomfortable, looked like he wanted to step forward, but Chad waved him off. "Listen," Chad said, lowering his voice just enough to sound professional, but loud enough for nearby ears to catch. "People like you don't usually shop for vehicles like this. If you'd like to schedule an appointment and maybe dress a bit more appropriately, we'd be happy to talk." The message was clear. You don't belong here. The entire exchange had taken just under 3 minutes, but it left Emma standing in a silent, uncomfortable spotlight, surrounded by curious glances and raised eyebrows. And with that, Chad turned his back, already moving toward a couple dressed in designer labels who had just entered the showroom. Emma took a slow breath. She looked once more at the coupe, the car she had planned to purchase that day with a wire transfer. Then she looked at the people in the room, most of whom had made up their minds about her based on her jeans and t-shirt. She didn't say another word. With quiet dignity, she turned and walked out the way she came, her simple sneakers squeaking softly against the marble floor. But as she reached the parking lot, the sting in her chest began to shift. Not into sadness, not into rage, but into resolve. Outside, Emma pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. She wasn't calling customer service. She wasn't writing a bad review. She was calling someone who would understand exactly what had just happened because he had always understood her, not because of what she wore, but because of who she was. The phone rang once. "Ethan," she said when he answered, "I just had a very interesting morning at Regency Auto." The wind stirred her hair as she leaned against her car. "And I think we have something to talk about." By the time Emma arrived home, the sun had begun its slow climb toward noon. She pulled into the quiet driveway of the Carter's estate, a 5-acre property just outside of Boston, hidden behind tall oak trees and unassuming gates. The house, though expansive, was tastefully understated. No gold fixtures, no marble fountains, just elegance, privacy, and purpose. Inside, in his home office, Ethan Carter looked up from his desk as soon as Emma entered. His face shifted instantly from concentration to concern. 15 years of marriage had taught him how to read every nuance in her expression. Something was wrong. Emma sank into the leather chair across from him and recounted the events of the morning. She didn't dramatize or exaggerate. She didn't need to. The facts spoke for themselves. The condescension, the dismissiveness, the quiet smirks, and finally, the humiliation. Ethan listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When she finished, there was a pause. Then she said quietly, "It wasn't about me. I know who I am." But how many people face that kind of treatment and don't have the power to do anything about it because Emma Carter wasn't just a woman in jeans and a t-shirt. She was the founder and executive director of the Carter Foundation, a nationally recognized non-profit that provided adaptive equipment therapy and educational support for children with disabilities. The foundation had raised over $50 million in the last decade. Emma had started it from a one-bedroom apartment and a vision board. She had lived frugally for years to put everything into it. Even after marrying Ethan, who had made his billions in renewable energy storage, she never stopped choosing simplicity. Her clothing wasn't a lack of resources, it was a choice. Emma believed that modest living helped her stay grounded, stay connected to the families she served. She had never been interested in outward displays of wealth. But today's experience had stirred something deep. She wasn't angry for herself. She was angry for the woman who gets denied service because she doesn't look rich enough, for the man ignored at the bank because of his accent, for every young person told they don't belong based on surface-level assumptions. Ethan leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "What would you like to do?" he asked, his voice steady, but laced with fire. Emma thought for a moment. "A part of me wants to walk away and never give that place another thought," she said honestly. "But another part of me wants them to learn. Not with anger, with perspective." Ethan's lips curved into a small smile. "Then maybe it's time for a little education." And so the wheels began to turn. Not for revenge, not for drama, but for something far more powerful. Emma and Ethan began crafting a plan, one that would not only expose the danger of assumptions, but open eyes, hearts, and maybe even doors. This wasn't about proving her worth. It was about reminding the world that worth is never defined by what you wear, but by who you are when no one is watching. That evening, the Carter residence was bathed in soft amber light as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emma sat on the back patio, a cup of herbal tea in her hands, while Ethan joined her with a silent nod of understanding. He'd spent the afternoon going over every detail she had shared, and though the sting of injustice still lingered in his expression, there was also something else resolve. Emma had seen it in him before, not the kind born of pride or anger, but the calm, deliberate fire of a man who believed in doing what's right, not what's easy. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I don't think this is something we should ignore," he said softly. "But I also don't think it's something we punish. At least, not in the way they'd expect." Emma looked over at him, curiosity in her eyes. "So what are you thinking?" Ethan smiled just a little. "Not revenge, education." The word hung in the air like a fresh breeze. What if we could show them, not just tell them, but show them the consequences of their assumptions? What if we gave them a chance to learn something they clearly missed? Emma stirred her tea, slowly absorbing his words. Her instinct was always to turn the other cheek, to rise above, but this idea wasn't about ego or retribution. It was about shifting minds. They spent the next hour quietly strategizing. No headlines, no press. Just a simple, powerful moment of truth. Ethan knew the exact car to use, a rare, custom-built Rolls-Royce Phantom with a finish so distinct it would demand attention without a single word. More than just a display of wealth, it would be a symbol, a mirror held up to a place that had failed to look deeper. Emma, for her part, didn't want to be present when it happened. "It's not about me needing to see their faces," she explained. "It's about whether they'll remember mine." She paused, then added, "and whether they'll treat the next person who looks like me with respect." As they finalized the plan, Ethan made a few quiet phone calls, one to the garage, one to his assistant, and one to a friend who owed him a favor. Everything was set for the following morning. Emma watched him as he moved through the house with quiet efficiency. Despite his billion-dollar fortune, he had never needed to raise his voice to command attention. What made him powerful wasn't his money, it was his clarity of purpose. And that night his purpose was clear: to remind a group of professionals at Regency Auto Gallery that character is revealed not in how we treat the rich, but in how we treat those we think are not. Before going to bed, Emma left a note on his desk. It read, "Teach them kindly, but let the lesson echo." Ethan read it in the soft lamplight of his study, folded it and tucked it into his coat pocket. He wasn't going to the dealership to boast or make a scene. He was going to give them a chance to grow, and maybe, just maybe, to redeem themselves in a way no punishment could ever achieve. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, the kind of morning that made everything feel more vivid. At precisely 10:17 a.m., a low, velvety purr echoed down the quiet streets outside Regency Auto Gallery. Heads turned as a car unlike any they had seen before rolled smoothly to a stop at the front entrance. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase, custom midnight blue finish that shimmered with purple undertones in the sunlight. Even for a dealership that prided itself on exotic inventory, this car stood apart. Conversation inside the showroom halted mid-sentence as eyes shifted toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. Chad Reynolds, ever alert to high-value prospects, practically sprang from his office. His navy suit was flawless, his tie pinched perfectly at the collar, and his practice smile already warming up. He strode past junior salesmen with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. "Good morning, sir," he called out as he approached the car. "Welcome to Regency Auto Gallery. I'm Chad Reynolds, sales manager. How can we help you today?" The driver, clad in a sleek chauffeur uniform, had already stepped out, walking briskly to open the rear passenger door. From the vehicle emerged a man whose presence demanded silence. Tall silver at the temples, dressed in a charcoal grey suit that whispered elegance, Ethan Carter stepped out with measured calm. His polished shoes met the concrete with precision, his eyes scanning the dealership as if measuring more than just its inventory. Chad, sensing a seven-figure transaction in the air, extended his hand. "It's an honor to have you with us, sir. Are you here for a specific model? Perhaps I could interest you in—" "I'm here," Ethan interrupted gently, "about the Azure Coupe. Midnight blue. You showed it to a customer yesterday." Chad's smile faltered just slightly. "Of course, sir. It's a stunning model. We only have one left in stock. May I ask the name of the customer you're referencing?" Ethan looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "Her name is Emma Carter. My wife." The color drained from Chad's face. His eyes widened as he made the connection. The woman in the jeans, the plain shirt, the one he'd publicly brushed off less than 24 hours ago. I wasn't aware," he stammered, but Ethan raised a hand. "You were aware. You just didn't look beyond what you saw." Around them, staff had begun to gather, sensing a shift in the air. Even Richard, the dealership's owner, emerged from his office, drawn by the energy radiating from the entrance. Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I came here today not to humiliate you, Chad," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I came here to ask a question. Is this how you treat all your customers, or just the ones who don't look like they belong?" Silence followed. Not even the showroom music dared to play. And in that quiet, the lesson began, not through anger, but through presence. Not through punishment, but through truth. Chad stood frozen, suddenly aware that the man before him wasn't just a wealthy client. He was a mirror reflecting back every assumption Chad had made. The atmosphere inside Regency Auto Gallery was heavy with anticipation. Sales associates and curious customers lingered in quiet clusters, their gazes fixed on the confrontation unfolding near the Azure Coupe. Ethan Carter, still composed in his tailored suit, stood firm with the poise of a man who had nothing to prove but everything to say. Chad Reynolds, usually the loudest voice in the room, had fallen noticeably silent. His jaw clenched, and his eyes darted to Richard Mason, the dealership's owner, hoping for an escape. But Richard only watched, tense alert and uncharacteristically quiet. The weight of the moment had shifted from business to principle. Ethan turned to face the growing audience. "Yesterday," he began calmly, "my wife Emma Carter came here to purchase a birthday gift for her sister, a woman who just overcame a year-long battle with cancer. Emma entered your dealership with dignity and intent. She was met with laughter, dismissal, and condescension." A ripple of discomfort moved through the staff. Ethan continued, The man standing before you today is the same man behind the company that's replaced over 100 corporate vehicle fleets across the East Coast. I had planned to explore a similar opportunity here. Chad visibly perked up for a split-second, hope flickering in his eyes, until Ethan turned and faced the junior salesman. But there was only one person who saw my wife for who she truly was. Ben, the young associate who had quietly stepped forward, looked nervous but determined. She was polite, he said, his voice soft but steady. She knew exactly which car she wanted, and I was about to help her. But Mr. Reynolds took over. He swallowed, glancing at Chad. He told her she was wasting our time, that this car was for a different class of customer. The room stilled. No one moved. Chad's expression hardened, but the damage had already been done. Richard closed his eyes briefly, a sigh escaping his lips. Ethan nodded toward Ben. "Thank you," he said simply, then turned back to Chad. "You taught me something valuable yesterday. You taught me how little it takes to damage a brand's integrity, not with a press release, but with a smirk." With that, Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a folder. "I will still be purchasing the Azure Coupe," he said, handing the paperwork to Ben. "For my sister-in-law. But as for the fleet of corporate vehicles..." He turned his gaze to Richard. "I no longer believe this dealership aligns with our company values." A gasp echoed from somewhere in the crowd. Chad's face paled as the full implications set in, hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, walking out the door, not with anger, but with purpose. Ethan's voice remained quiet, unwavering. "Reputation isn't built on luxury. It's built on how you treat the ones you think don't matter." Richard, clearly shaken, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, I can't express how deeply sorry we are. I was only partially aware of yesterday's incident. This is not who we are." Ethan turned toward him and nodded thoughtfully. "Apologies are words, but actions build trust. I'm not interested in vengeance. I'm interested in awareness." He paused, allowing the gravity of the moment to settle. Then, with deliberate calm, he turned back to Chad. "I'm not going to file a complaint. I'm not going to smear your name across headlines. Instead, I'm going to offer you something I believe you desperately need." Chad looked up, surprised. His face betrayed a mix of suspicion and shame. "The Carter Foundation is hosting a charity gala next month," Ethan continued. "We're raising funds for a new adaptive sports facility for children with disabilities. We need volunteers, people to serve meals, help guests, push wheelchairs, be invisible but essential." He took a step closer. "You need to understand what it means to serve, not just to sell." Chad opened his mouth as if to protest, but stopped. It wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation to become someone different. Ethan then looked to Richard. "I also recommend you bring in consultants, people who specialize in unconscious bias training, not just for Chad, for the entire staff. Because if one person can humiliate a customer at the front door, it tells me the culture behind that door needs fixing." Richard nodded vigorously, clearly eager to turn this moment into something reparative. "Absolutely. I will make those calls today. And I'll be at the gala too. We'll do better, Mr. Carter." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then let's begin now with the truth and with the work that follows it." The staff dispersed slowly, whispers and realizations rippling like waves across the showroom. Ben stood by the Azure Coupe, still holding the paperwork, not fully understanding what had just happened, but knowing something important had shifted. And Chad, silent and pale, was left with the one thing money couldn't buy, a moment of reckoning. One that would either haunt him or change him forever. The evening of the Carter Foundation Gala arrived with grace and energy. The grand ballroom of the Boston Grand Hotel was transformed into a place of light and life. Children in wheelchairs, walkers and prosthetics moved freely among donors, musicians and volunteers. At the check-in table, wearing a black staff vest and name tag that simply read, "Volunteer," stood Chad Reynolds. He directed guests with measured politeness, carried trays of bottled water, and gently helped a young boy in leg braces find his table. He had traded his title for humility, his suit for service. He had nearly declined the invitation. But something about the way Ethan had spoken and the look in Emma's eyes had stayed with him. So, he had shown up. And now, after just a few hours, he found himself quieted. The stories of the children, the joy on their faces despite physical struggles, the resilience of the families. None of it could be unseen. He didn't feel like a manager in charge of sales anymore. He felt like a student. And his lesson was only beginning. Late into the evening, Emma approached him. She wore a simple navy dress and no jewelry, just like she had in the showroom. Yet now, in this space of purpose, Chad saw her differently. Not as someone underdressed, but as someone undeniably whole. "How are you finding the experience?" she asked gently. Chad swallowed hard. "Humbling," he said after a long pause. "And necessary." Emma nodded with quiet approval. She glanced over at the boy in braces, now laughing with his father. "His name is Thomas," she said. "He likes basketball. He'll try to teach you, but he doesn't go easy on anyone." Chad gave a short, genuine laugh. "He already told me I shoot like a giraffe." Emma smiled, and for the first time Chad felt something shift, not just in the way she looked at him, but in the way he looked at himself. "I know I've apologized formally," he said, his voice steady, but I needed to say it here, in person. "Thank you for not destroying me, and for giving me a chance to change." Emma held his gaze. "There's no excuse for what happened, Chad. But growth matters more than guilt. Just promise me you'll keep going." And he did. Over the weeks that followed, Chad didn't stop volunteering. He didn't wear a vest for attention or show up just to be seen. He returned to the foundation events as often as his schedule allowed, setting up chairs, carrying equipment, helping kids get in and out of adaptive bicycles. He even began mentoring new volunteers. His evenings looked different now. Less cocktails and closing deals, more emails about inclusion, more conversations about impact. Something fundamental had changed, and he didn't want to go back. Back at Regency Auto Gallery, the ripple effect began to show. Chad worked with Richard Mason to implement new customer service policies, ones that prioritized dignity, not perception. Staff underwent regular training, and for the first time, customers who walked in without a designer label were greeted with the same respect as those who arrived in tailored suits. Ben, the junior salesman, had been promoted and now led the dealership's community outreach program. It was a different place now because someone had dared to confront the old ways. Then, one morning, Ethan Carter walked back into the showroom, not with confrontation this time, but with opportunity. "We're revisiting the idea of a new corporate fleet," he said calmly. "And Daniel tells me you've been mentoring him." Chad blinked, surprised. "I have, yes." "He's sharp." Ethan nodded. "We'd like you to handle the transaction." There was no test in his voice. No warning. Just trust. Chad took a deep breath, humbled by the offer. "I'd be honored, sir. Truly." That evening at another foundation event, Chad knelt beside Thomas, helping him with his wheelchair before a group photo. The boy looked up at him and said, "You know what, Mr. Chad? You're pretty cool for a grown-up." Chad smiled, deeply moved. "Coming from you, Thomas, that's the best thing I've heard in a long time." And he meant it. Because in that moment, Chad finally understood what Ethan and Emma had known all along. True worth isn't measured by appearance, income, or position. It's measured by how you treat people when no one's watching. If this story moved you, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more powerful stories that challenge the way we judge others and remind us of what truly matters. Have you ever been misjudged because of how you looked or witnessed someone else face unfair treatment? Share your experience in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity, empathy, and how we treat others when no one is watching. See you in the next story.